The following stories are from members of Hanmaum Church in South Korea. They aired on a Korean Christian TV network called C Channel and were dubbed in English.
Hello, I am Dong-Wook Kim from the Hanmaum Church in Chincheon. I pursued a normal life where I never stood out. When other people said yes, I would say yes too. I wanted a laid-back life, a life that flowed like a gentle stream. Things like passion and ambition were not for me. Maybe that's why I would wait for hot food to cool down and for cold food to get lukewarm before I ate. A lukewarm life was perfectly suited for my taste. But when I met the risen Christ, I began to live passionately for God. I would like to share my testimony with you. My dream was to live a quiet life. I disliked busy cities that had many people and many cars. I wanted to go somewhere quiet, like a valley in the Gangwon province, with nice mountains and good water, and a peaceful teaching job. When I reached a certain age, I wanted to retire, move somewhere that resembled the Mongolian highlands, build myself a small house, and live my life quietly. Then when it was time for me to die, I wanted to gaze out at the sunset and say, it was a good life. That was the kind of life I wanted to live. But my childhood was far from that dream. My parents had a self-confessed 3-day sickness, where they would fight every 3 days. Also, my 2 brothers seemed like they had no common sense. My eldest brother never studied and lived recklessly, while my second brother was obsessed with his friends and brand names, always begging my mom for money. Despite this, I tried my best to live in my own quiet way. School life was no different. Rather than excelling or even being normal, I tried to make sure that I was never noticed. When I was in class or in a presentation, I would try to brainwash myself with thoughts like, I'm not here. I'm just a desk. I'm part of the air. I don't exist. When I came home from school, I would usually just quietly watch TV or read a book, then go to bed. When I was in the house, no one was talking. This went on throughout my adolescence. These days, teenagers terrorized their parents. My adolescence was quiet and peaceful period. No matter what kind of storm was raging outside, and no matter how crazy things got at home, I didn't react. My mother even said, he never went through puberty. In this way, I wanted to live like the average, normal person. I never felt any passion for anything, and didn't want to either. Then I took my first step towards a life of my own. I entered university. Because my dream was to live in the Gangwon province, I naturally went to a university in the Gangwon province in order to live a peaceful life teaching children. I went to a teacher's college. I made my way to Chincheon just like how I wanted all along, but I had no connection to the city. It was an unfamiliar place. When I was wondering where I should live, I was reminded of something. I had received a yellow flyer about a dorm when I was here for my admissions interview. I remembered I had shoved it into a corner somewhere in my house a month ago. I called the number on the flyer and asked if they had a room, and they said they did. That was how I decided where to live. It turned out to be a church dormitory. It was only then I realized the yellow flyer had said there were mandatory morning prayers. I had decided to go there without attending church or even knowing what the requirements were, but it didn't matter. One of my friends was a devout Christian who kept encouraging me to go to church with him. I didn't want to, so I always told him, you can go by yourself. But when I started going to church, he came to my mind. I wanted to tell him, I bet you don't go to morning prayer. I'm going to church more than you do. I thought this was a good opportunity to get a win over that friend. I naively thought that if I went to morning prayer, I would be better than my friend. However, the image I had of church up until then was not a very good one. That image had been formed in my high school years. Especially when I was in high school, our class and the class next to ours had a lot of churchgoers. They had names like Joseph and Aaron. though I didn't even know that those were biblical names at the time. But the students who went to church seemed to behave worse than other kids and have worse personalities. I went to church with my head full of these kinds of ideas, but when I actually went, it was different. Everyone was always smiling and being so nice to me. It made me think, do they want something from me? But they'd buy me a lot of food like pizza and chicken on the weekends. I didn't know what to think, but I felt like I was in heaven. It was a heaven where people paid for my meals and gave me lots of things and my heart opened wide. So I thought I could be fine with anything in church, but there was one thing that was really hard to deal with. That was morning prayer. At first, I was able to get up. Since everyone else was waking up at the same time, I was able to get up too. But on the third day, I began to think, how long do I have to keep doing this? For someone who liked to sleep in like I did, it was extremely hard to go to morning prayer. Even when I went, I didn't understand the sermon, and I would just wait for prayer time. When it came, I would pray, God, I'm tired, so I'm going to sleep, and I would wake up around the time service ended. One day, I woke up while the prayer time was still going on. I didn't know how to pray, so I watched other people as they prayed. They prayed so fervently and passionately, and I found myself admiring them. When I saw people praying with their hands in the air, I thought, I wonder why they're praying with their hands up. I don't believe in God's existence, but if it is what these people believe in, I want to believe it too. I want to become like these people. The truth was, the only reason I wanted to live in peace and was because I wanted to escape hardship. I wanted everything to be peaceful, from my thoughts to my body to my life. But my life and my heart weren't like that. When I saw the others praying with such passion, I saw in them a peace I didn't have. I think that was around the time I made this decision in my heart. Let's try to seek God. A person should think about God seriously at least once in his life, right? If God's worth believing in, I'll believe. But if he's not, and there's no basis for faith, and then I won't look back twice and leave. Why should I waste my time, money, and life going to church? If it is all real, I'll believe. I'll put my life on the line. I went to my church friends and said, I want to believe in God too. But how do I believe in a God I can't see? There's no way for me to know whether he exists or not. They told me, if you want to believe, then think about Jesus. I didn't understand. I thought, why did they bring up Jesus when I said I want to believe in God? Isn't Jesus a mythical figure? Still, I had to think about what my friends had said. I started to dig through history books, encyclopedias, and the internet to find records of Jesus. I put the Bible aside. I thought that if Jesus really did exist, he should exist in history outside of the Bible. I discovered that Jesus was not just found in textbooks, but was also written about in historical accounts. I read the accounts of Josephus, who was a Judean historian living around the year 37 AD, which was very close to Jesus' time. He knew Jesus' disciples and lived alongside them. Reading his accounts about Jesus, I realized that Jesus was not a mystical figure, but a real historical person who had lived on earth. Only then was I was able to read the Bible and focus on what Jesus had said. But he was saying some ridiculous things. Jesus was saying he was God, that he had existed before Abraham, and that he would rise again 3 days after his death. I felt like this didn't sound right, so I let go of my search. I was really frustrated. During that time, I went to a retreat and heard a sermon about Jesus' disciples. The way they behaved seemed very real. The scene where they fled in the face of death was so realistic. It was clear that what mattered to them the most was their own lives. But I was surprised when I heard about how they were all martyred after seeing the risen Jesus. How could this happen? They were the disciples who abandoned Jesus at the cross. The most precious thing for them had been their own lives, but after they saw Jesus risen, they had changed completely. They had done a 180-degree turn and were now dying while preaching that Jesus was alive. What was that about? That they would throw away their own lives meant that something incredibly big had happened in that time. What was it? The only thing that made sense was Jesus' resurrection. This was an undeniable piece of evidence to me. Jesus really had come back to life. This person really had come back to life. The proof that God was alive, the proof that was believable to everyone, was the resurrection. I was able to understand what the Bible means when it says the disciples were able to believe Jesus' words and the scriptures after he rose again. This man really was God. Through the resurrection, I realized that Jesus, who had died on the cross, was really God, and he had died for me. It was only then that I saw my own sin. I saw my disbelief for what it was. I had not believed in God himself. In my heart, I wanted to make excuses, like I never read the Bible, so I didn't know, or I didn't go to church, so I didn't know. But that was just my own thinking. When I saw things from God's perspective, I had to take him so much more seriously. The Almighty God had given up the glory of heaven to come to earth. I realized that Jesus had died and risen to prove that he was God. And the sin of not believing in that fact was the greatest sin in the world. I thought Jesus really did come down to earth for me. He came to earth for me, died and rose again to show me that he is God, and I didn't believe him. I could only wonder what I could even do. When I was wondering what I should do, they said that I should repent of my sin and accept Jesus as my Lord. I was so thankful. I was beyond thankful to be able to accept and believe that Jesus, who had risen to become the Lord of the living and the dead, was my Lord. I repented my sin of not believing in Jesus and accepted him as my Lord. I learned that my desire to live peacefully under the radar was ultimately my own selfishness, and living my own way was being my own Lord. I learned that living only for Christ was the best life and could enjoy while on this earth, not quietly living for myself. I had been a person who hated the spotlight, but when Jesus became my Lord, I became someone who tried his hardest at everything. Before, I wouldn't try my best at anything, but only do enough to satisfy myself. But as Jesus became my Lord, all the values I used to have were changed. After believing in Jesus, I started praying for something. It was that my family would also be saved. Learning about Jesus' resurrection made me think about my unbelieving family members. In our household, there were not a single person who attended church. Because we are not from a Christian culture, there was no way our family could know about Jesus. So I began to share the gospel with my parents and brothers whenever I went home. My mother said to me, "I didn't know you could talk that much." One time when I shared the gospel of the resurrection with my father, he told me off. He told me, "You have your path, I have my path. Now stop telling me these things." Though this was discouraging, I continued to share the gospel whenever I had the chance. In time, my eldest brother, who had lived recklessly, came to believe in Jesus. He couldn't help but wonder about how the Almighty had come down to this earth. My father had a serious accident falling off a cliff, and began to seriously think about how he had lived and about the existence of God. And then he heard the gospel of the resurrection and accepted Jesus as his Lord. I believe these events were God answering my prayers. I am currently working as an elementary school teacher. Whenever a new year begins, there is something I always tell my students. You guys should be thankful to have met me. There are a lot of teachers in this world, but it's hard to meet a teacher that prays for you. But I'm one of those praying teachers. 10 or 20 years later, I don't want you to remember me as a teacher that was fun or taught real well, but a teacher who prayed for you and loved you. In this way, I bless my students as I teach them. Living my best each day like this is really joyful. Before I met Jesus, I lived to achieve a selfish dream of peacefulness. Now, having met the risen Christ, I live for a dream of bringing lost people to salvation and running joyfully towards God. I will continue to live passionately for the Lord. Thank you.
If you'd like to see more stories about how the gospel changed lives, visit us at facebook.com/HMUOnlyJesus or Google us at HMUOnlyJesus.